Coming up, that preseason game number 1 had more than just high-level superstar talent and all the right feels heading into the regular season. There were also the new additions for the Brooklyn Nets in the form of Yuta Watanabe and Edmond Sumner, to say nothing of one Markieff Morris, as we look at how these key roles coming off the bench could fill out for Brooklyn. We break it down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Yes, friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. My boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, I've got a little bit of a PSA for the people out there, but how are we on a Tuesday? What will be a Wednesday when everyone's hearing this, as we're going to dive in on the second half of that first preseason game. But I do have a message for some of the fans.
Yeah, I'm still riding high from the game last night. Just glad to have NBA back. I've gotten to catch a little bit of other preseason action from other teams, but obviously the Nets one was the one we were waiting for. So if you didn't listen to yesterday's episode, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we broke down the Simmons, the Durant, the Kyrie, the pairing, the big three, all the stuff. Excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today too, which is sort of how the rest of the team sort of fleshes out. But what's your PSA?
Yeah, by the way, I can tell you what to do if you didn't see that episode. Go watch it or go listen to it. You can do that. We don't take it down after 24 hours. It'll be there for you on YouTube, there for you on the podcast feed as well. My disclaimer is this. Don't talk to me about the Nets need to package up 3 players and go trade for Miles Turner. Stop talking to me about, they're still not big enough. They need another guy in the backcourt at the guard spot. They need another ball handler. Nothing about our first half breakdown from yesterday or what we discussed today is a referendum on the entire season. And also, it's totally cool to go through the preseason and get into the regular season, maybe give it a few weeks and see what this team looks like. Like, that's what we're supposed to be doing to start the season, not already talking like this team is broken and needs to be fixed again. Been a long couple of years. Why don't we enjoy it to start?
It's tough to have nice things sometimes. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I understand to some degree why Nets fans feel a little snake bit here. We'll talk obviously about what the second half of this game looked like. I do get the feeling, I do understand the sentiment around wanting to have a complete team here, because these last couple seasons have been just so weird and wonky, and they've been guys short. It hasn't been because the roster construction has been necessarily all bad. It's just because there's a bunch of other stuff that's happened. But I will say, you have to feel super encouraged, I think, about what the Nets, what we saw from what they threw out in the second half here in terms of overall depth. We're going to talk about it. I do think it's a little premature to feel like the team is super incomplete now. You do not need to be a complete team on October 4th of an NBA season. Like, there's time to address certain things. It's often best to address those things once you've seen how the core actually interacts with each other, rather than trying to predict it. Like, we are one half of basketball basically into seeing what Simmons plus Durant plus Kyrie looks like. That's just not enough to know exactly what else you need. Right. So we're going to get to these guys now, but like, I think that's where you can just pump the brakes. It's okay. They don't need to be a complete team right now. They don't need to have every checkbox filled. Like, there will be other players that will come available as the season goes on, as teams are in or not in the playoff hunt. Like, Miles Turner is not the only basketball player. I know every team in the NBA fan base wants Miles Turner on their team. Like, there's a reason they haven't traded for him. I don't know, whatever. Okay, let's talk about these other guys.
That being the case, as we said yesterday, we talked about the high-level players, obviously the starting unit, and then really ultimately what was an 8-man rotation when they added Royce O'Neal coming off the bench, along with Day'Ron Sharpe and Patty Mills. Now, Royce O'Neal, he basically came out at that point. Patty Mills didn't see anything after he played his, 10 minutes, I think he ended up putting in there. Yeah, 10 minutes for him. And then, so the first one, just interesting as a footnote, Day'Ron Sharpe continued to play into the second half here to give himself a little bit of a run, 19 minutes in total. But then we get into some of the interesting ones, right? I've been talking about Yuta Watanabe a lot. I think that you, rightfully so, as Steve Nash mentioned, Markieff Morris, he's a 5 for the Brooklyn Nets, and you've been talking about what he brings to this team, the intangibles and also the functionality. And then a surprising guy in Edmond Sumner, who we were curious about, he really showed up here. Which one is your most intriguing that you want to tap into first?
Okay, so yeah, just to recap, they start Sumner, Cam, David Duke Jr., Watanabe, and Markieff Morris in that starting 5 for the second half. It's like a full line switch, right? So that is who they ran out there to start the second half. Sharp, I believe, did not start with that group, mostly because I think they were just looking to get those 5 together, and then he was just going to play sort of like fill in minutes because they just needed to have another big body at some point, and he needs all the. So I think that was probably the line of thinking around that. And I will just, and before I give my opinion about this, I will say, some people make comments like, oh, the second unit this is not the team's second unit. Like, this is the players that they are trying to figure out who is going to make the team and actually break camp and have rotational minutes going forward. This is not like the second unit of players that's going to come in on the first rotation for the Nets. We saw what that looked like. That was Royce O'Neal and Patty Mills and Day'Ron. So in terms of like what we saw from this group, I think there's a lot to be encouraged about here. Sumner specifically looked, 1, completely healthy, and 2, a sort of a different kind of player than this team has had a little bit in the past, which is he's a lengthier point guard who can get to the rim. He's very quick. If you've seen him play at all with the Pacers before he suffered that injury, or if you follow Pacers folks, like Tony East and some of these other guys, like there was a sort of like one who got away idea around Sumner, in that like the timing of the injury for him was poor. And then they just weren't in a direction where they were just going to be developing guys like this going forward, because they have Halliburton, et cetera. And so him kind of making a play with a team like the Nets is an interesting move. And I think we began to see the reasons why in his time on the court last night. 4 for 6 from the field, was able to get to the line, was able to get to the basket. Like I said, he moves really fluidly. He's not probably a traditional point guard in this, in certain senses, but in terms of secondary ball handling, I think that we could definitely see minutes for him off the bench, especially as we get longer into the season. I really liked what we saw here. I think he can guard multiple positions as well. And just from an athleticism standpoint, I do feel like sometimes we are sort of years removed from having athletic guys on the team. This is by the way, take this with a grain of salt. All NBA guys are athletic, obviously. But then the certain classes of athleticism within those tiers, the Nets just haven't had a lot of athleticism on their team, like young, spry, quick kind of guys that also had NBA-ish bodies too, in terms of length. And Sumner has that. And I think that is just encouraging in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
Like just having like a 6'4", 200 guy with a nice wingspan who can handle the ball, get to the rim, make the right reads, looks very fluid on the court. I think that he should be actually probably playing some minutes here, even maybe to start the season.
Yeah, you mentioned Tony East there. I remember going back and talking with him about getting Sumner, and he said it at the time. Like, fans of the Pacers were disappointed to lose him. And he said, if he's healthy, the Nets have gotten a player here. If he's going to be healthy, he's a guy that has real upside. And to your point, just out of that first preseason game, I look at him and go, okay, in terms of what we don't have in the backcourt, this is a player that can push up the rotation and be a part of, right? So 8 guys were a part of that starting rotation and the men off the bench in the first half. If you're going to go out to 9 and 10th guys on the bench here, I would say Sumner's on that inside track to be a part of that group, specifically for the skill set that he brings. You mentioned it. Athleticism, quickness, on-ball ability. It's just something that when Kyrie Irving comes off the court, you start to look around a little bit, right? And you mentioned it, I'll tie it into yesterday, talking about what it can look like when Ben Simmons is on the floor and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving need not be on there. Sumner, I think, is a guy that you can start to look at and say, yes, his skill set could be a part of that rotation with Ben Simmons, where the athleticism, the shooting ability comes into play in a big way.
Yeah, and if you think like the 40% three-point shooting in his last, 2 seasons ago is anything close to real, sample size was pretty small. But if it's going to be like, he got himself up to over 30, he was up over 33% shooting from beyond the arc. If any of that is even a little real, then he'll fit in real nicely. Like a team that wants to play fast, a team that wants to read and react, like wants to get out and transition, that can pair and guard like I said, sort of like the 1 and the 2 from other teams.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of guy we know can fit with Kyrie. Like we know that's the kind of play, and with Simmons too, frankly, if he can shoot. Those are the kind of guys that will pair nicely with some of these other guys on the Nets. And like I said,
the height matters. The height matters a lot
Yeah.
here because nobody else has in the backcourt. You talk about Patty Mills, talk about Cam Thomas, talk about any of the other guys. None of them have that ability to say when they step onto the court, you're not all of a sudden becoming a pick on assignment. You mentioned the defensive ability as well. We're not going to get out over our skis on them, but just it looks like this feels the same when we talked about Royce O'Neal yesterday in terms of his role. All of the skill sets say, oh, this is going to fit really nicely. That seems like what Sumner can project for.
100%. And so I think we were wondering about the health, and it's good to wonder about this stuff as we know about the TJ Warren not being able to, break camp after a multiple season injury or a full season injury. And Sumner was coming off a bad injury also. So all signs were that he was healthy. I think we definitely saw that to be the case here in this first game. We're going to talk about some of these other contributions that we saw from the Nets bench and who may or may not end up making the team. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Prize Picks. If you're into daily fantasy, you have to really get into Prize Picks. It's the easiest way to get in entries, to work with player projections, to kind of go more or less on certain stats. It's really super easy to use. Like right now, you can go to Prize Picks. You can get Julius Randle, 13.5. You want to get more or less than that in his next game? You can go right there. Cade Cunningham, 12.5 points. These were up for the Nets games as well, going back a game ago. But PrizePicks just going to have it up there. Not just points either, rebounds, assists, and you're not putting out lineups like you are on some of these other sites where you need to fiddle with salary. It's just you versus the projections. That's all you need to know about Prize Picks. They make it super, super easy. You're not competing against other people, and they offer those projections on any sport that you watch. NBA, like I said, get in there for NFL Sunday, MLB while the season's still rolling around, NHL coming. I can't believe NHL about to start again. All available for you on Prize Picks. You can make an entry in 60 seconds or less. It's super easy. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100. You have to use the promo code LOCKED ON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. The math really plays out well for you there. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKED ON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks.com.
All right. So beyond Edmond Sumner, who I think we would both agree that we were curious and then very pleasantly surprised how good he looked, right? So he kind of overtook, I think, a couple of the other narratives that we were talking about coming into it. We'll just go ahead and read that graphic there for you YouTube users. It's Yuta Watanabe time. Listen, friends, when you put yourself out there on the line like yours truly did, talking about a player who was getting about 11 minutes in Toronto and didn't necessarily know what he was going to end up being. In terms of putting your best foot forward, I thought Yuta Watanabe showed basically everything that the scouting report tells you. He's not the most athletic guy. He's not the most agile. He's not the best defender. But guess what? From a Brooklyn Nets standpoint, 16 minutes, 3 of 5 from the field, knocked down one of his 2 triples, got to the line 4 times as well, gave you 4 defensive rebounds, and gave you 10 points. Like, I just think for this team and what they need, he's the exactly slightly versatile, plug him into a couple of positions, and give you a consistent expectation when you put him out there for that 10 to 15 minute portion of time on the floor. If we're talking about getting into the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th guys on this team, I think Yuta Watanabe put a great first step forward to say, yes, I have the length and the ability to plug in here. Again, let's keep talking about that second unit and maintaining a level of consistency on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, I think we could read a little bit into what these lineups were here and the minutes guys played in terms of how like the sort of the overall feeling or sentiment plays out with the guys that they, have to make decisions on at the end of the roster. Watanabe was part of my most tilting part of the night where he got elbowed in the face and we were just waiting the podcast to go live and they had to do like a 5-minute long check to make sure it wasn't a flagrant. And Adam and I are just sitting there waiting to premiere for the YouTube thing. So that was my lasting Yuta Watanabe impression, was just like, did you have to stick your face in front of the elbow? We could have been podcasting already, but now we got to
think
do
about
this
endorsement deals too.
We got to do the ref. We got to do the ref show where they got to watch this thing 90 times.
Here come the zebras.
Just like everyone, he's even smiling at the end, like he's not hurt. Anyway, no, I think when you see that he starts with that group for starters, he plays 16 minutes with the core group that I think they're believing is going to make it here. The shooting looked like you wanted to see it. I mean, he only takes 5 shots, but he's able to get to the line a few times. 2 of them were on the flagrant. So, but in terms of like needing length and some athleticism and some ability to shoot at an NBA level, the Nets had brought in guys with length, but they didn't necessarily have the other requisite skills in the past. One was like being young, and 2 was being able to step out from beyond the arc. Even you're not a center, like maybe his 6'9" makes you think center. He's not that. He's like a 3. So because he's slight of frame, that's okay with the way that this group is currently constructed. I think that we saw. I mean, look, it's one preseason game. Did you see enough to make the team? I don't know about that, but it didn't take any steps backward for you here, right? And I think the team clearly sent the message that he probably is part of what they want to do going forward. And just from an archetype standpoint, makes sense for what they're trying to construct. He would not make sense for every team here, but I think for what the Nets are trying to put together for their, sort of thinking about 5-man units, his skill set does work.
Yeah, and I really think that, again, go back to, Kevin Durant's comments. It's a wing-driven league. The Nets actively went out and tried to improve that facet of their team. So, name me a year in the past 3 seasons where you would think of a player, and I'm not about this half of preseason game for the Nets, but name a player that you felt more confident about what his role would be and what the skill set was that they were able to put out there. The Blake Griffins of the world and the James Johnsons, go down the laundry list. None of these guys did you ever think, oh, they can do 2 or 3 things well. It was usually they do 1-ish pretty good, and then we'll see from there. And that's what creates a little bit of flexibility. So I was really high on him and his performance. Now the question becomes, same thing with Sumner, although really love what we saw. Now do it again in the second preseason game, right? Repeat this functionality, and then we can get really excited about it. Were you surprised then with Markieff Morris and when he started to get onto the court here? Because just reset who the first 5 were. Obviously, Day'Ron did not come in there immediately, but the first 5-man unit that started here in the second half for the Nets.
Yeah, it was Sumner, David Duke Jr., Cam Thomas, Markieff Morris, and Yuta Watanabe. Like that was
So let's pivot here. Just because Markieff Morris, I think we understand what he's going to be, so maybe there's not a whole lot to learn from him. Let's pivot to David Duke Jr.
By the way, that I will say, like, not a whole lot to learn from him also doesn't necessarily translate to like making the team. I don't know if his money's not guaranteed. I'm not confident 100% that he's with this final group. I get that. I know what you're saying, that we know what it is. I'm not necessarily convinced that because we know what it is, it means that they think that I think he does, but 9 minutes here didn't exactly inspire you with tons of confidence.
Because if you're talking about, so like Day'Ron Sharpe being a part of that initial unit, right? So you have Nicholas Claxton, we know Ben Simmons, then it's Day'Ron Sharpe, and then you start to think, well, how many big bodies do you need? Are the Nets more inclined to be playing a smaller version of their lineup? Morris fits into that mold, but I think you're right. Like it's what you have in him. Now I would say, regardless of position, it's about how many guys make a stronger case for deserving a role on this roster that then would put Morris potentially in jeopardy, right? And that's even why I said, let's pivot to David Duke Jr. and Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas isn't in any risk of not making this roster, but David Duke Jr., who over the summer league, and you were the first one to be pumping the brakes around it. Yes, it looks really good in summer league, but we know he can do that. Can he do it at the NBA level? He didn't look so great, right? He didn't necessarily put it out there where you felt confident. I'm not disappointed or frustrated or think he can't still pull off something here, but I think there's a reason why there wasn't a lot of traction around the league and why he came back on a 2-way for the Nets.
Yeah, like this, I mean, it was 17 minutes. So again, our opinion of a guy is rarely going to be swayed in any huge ways around, right. Changing our, let me put it this way, 17 minutes wouldn't change my priors one way or the other on a guy like David Duke Jr. And now lucky for us that he didn't do anything either to like even probably make it a discussion. I get why they want to give him multiple looks here and give him minutes. I think he's a guy that you probably want to continue to try to develop. I still don't know like what his core NBA skill set is. And I think that is something that we mentioned after summer league also is that he has athletic and his motor is really high. And if you want to use that as a piece of your skill set, sure. But motor is not going to be enough, I don't think, for him to like really play real quality minutes here. So I know he gets the look. I think that they made it a point to play him and Cam sort of as an extension of summer league and probably just to see what they had. But I just don't know why he would take someone else's roster spot at this point. And so I do think it's interesting that he was with this group. I think that probably tells us something is that like, okay, we want to continue to try to develop this guy. But in terms of what the Nets really need going to the season, he doesn't strike me as what it is they actually need.
No, and I think that's where it's hard. As he said, it's not even a knock on him. It'll just be a curiosity. No. Coming up here in a second, we can talk about obviously Cam Thomas, who got some run here. Not maybe surprising, but some confirmation around a player like Kessler Edwards and where he is in this pecking order based on where he came in. And then even looking at some of these other back end guys, names that we've heard a little bit from fans about wanting to see more of, at least initially, doesn't feel like we're going to be banging the drum for them to be making the 15-man. Okay, so here is the deal, friends. When we talk about one of the things I'll think is disappointing for me, I'll say, Cam Thomas gets into this game and take it for whatever it's worth. He's not showing me the next thing yet. It's one half of preseason, but I think this is my perspective on him. I like him. I like what he can be. The first thing he does is score. But you mentioned this about, you know what he needs to do, though, is show that he can knock down the outside shot with consistency in order to be that next level of contribution inside of this roster. Now, he knocked down his free throws because he got to the line a lot. That's something that he did show he could already do. He did not take any three-pointers in this game and shot 1 of 6 from the field. Are you just still kind of in the holding pattern when it comes to Cam Thomas as far as let's see how this goes as we get into the regular season? Because I don't know if we're going to learn anything concrete in the preseason games from him.
I mean, I'll take it even one step further. Not only did he not shoot a 3, he passed up an open look on the catch and shoot. He refuses to take catch and shoot threes. Like, I just don't understand why. I mean, I don't know if that's just where his game isn't predicated on it. Like, he wants to dribble into the mid range, and that's just or get to the rim and kind of draw contact. And he is really good at that. And that's a compliment for him. He's very good at drawing contact and getting the ball up. He's very good about finishing in a crowd, or at least getting shots up in a crowd. He's good on pull ups. Like, he is good at those things. But like, he has
in terms of complementing this roster.
He has to be able to shoot threes. He has to shoot threes. Like, and it's one thing to not do it. It's another thing. Again, he passed up. It was an above the break 3 that he was wide open on, and he did not shoot it. And there was a closeout. The closeout came so late, it shouldn't have mattered. And he ends up going around the closeout. But I'm like, you have to shoot that shot with this team. That is a shot you have to be able to shoot. And he just, as we are now multiple seasons in of him just kind of refusing to do it. And so
Day'Ron Sharpe had more 3-point attempts.
He had that one. I thought it was going down. That
No,
but you know what I mean. Like, this is like, it has to be part of his game. Like, you can't be a 2 guard in the NBA and not shoot threes. Like, there's not a place for the NBA. Like, if you play the 2, which he's effectively going to try to do here, and you just don't shoot 3-pointers. And when you do shoot 3-pointers, they don't really go in at above a league level rate. Like, I just don't know what you are. And that's my concern. And I don't want to use these 2 little examples from this game, but again, I'm not actually just picking and choosing these things. We've talked about this for years now, over the whole last year with him. Mm-hmm. If he doesn't do this thing that you have to do it at this position in the NBA, and if he's not going to do it or refuses even when it's wide open and presented to him, you have to lower the ceiling, like, really considerably on him.
Yeah, my thing is, first of all, that if I'm hard on him because I like what he is as a player, and I want to see him take the next step. And this is the next step. These are the next phases of your game that you need to be a part of for everything that he is good when he's on the ball and getting at the bucket and certainly drawing fouls. The other thing is, I'll point to, this is why you bring back Patty Mills in the offseason, because he fits the mold of what you want from that 2-guard position. This is why you take a flyer on a guy like Sumner if he can come back healthy, because when you look at your roster, if you're Sean Marks, you're not looking at it and saying, hey, we project that Cam Thomas can take that next step for us and be a contributor at this level, at role X, right? And I'll say it likewise for why they didn't maybe try to push for finding another big or someone that's going to stretch the floor because they like the development of Nicholas Claxton. They believe a little bit more, at least right now, in Day'Ron Sharpe, and they like some of the players they bring in. So I just think that Cam Thomas is further from repeating what we saw last year when he was getting some big minutes over certain portions of the season than maybe fans would want him to be. It's okay, but when you're undersized like that, you got to be better on the defensive end. You got to be better from the outside, and we'll see where it goes from here.
It's okay and it's not okay. Like it's just
like right. It's just fine, but it's not if you want to be a contributor. Consistent contributor, not fine. Developing as a young player for the Brooklyn Nets as a late first round pick, totally cool.
Yeah, and he does do those other things, like I said, really well. Like not an elite level, but he does it clearly at an NBA level. And so that is all good. It's just like if we want to dream about his upside, right? This is because at this point, that's what we're talking about. Really kind of just dreaming about his floor. Like his floor needs to be a guy who can space the court, and he just doesn't right now. Like if there's a book on him, it's that you actually don't even need to run a closeout to him. Like I'd say unclear he's going to shoot the shot anyway. Yeah. And so I just again, it's not the end of the world, and we still have a full season, and I don't think he's likely to swing this team one way or the other. But just in terms of his over, and he's clearly going to make the team and play and be on the bench this season. So that's there's no risk of that, but it's just that now the expectation, let me put it this way. With the NBA, it's usually about expectation. It's like your expectation levels go up after you do certain things. Like, okay, he met the first level of expectation. They got a value in the draft where they drafted him. He's better. A lot of other teams probably shouldn't have let him slip, and he can do certain things in the NBA level really, really well. Now, great. That's our new expectation. Now now we're stepping it up another notch to say, where's the growth going to be? And it just hasn't happened yet. So that's really my only overall thoughts about him. It's just that we just want to see him take the next step here.
The other thing here, I guess, just on the closeout on the back end of this one, when we look at from the depth perspective, Kessler Edwards seems like he's pretty far down the totem pole just in terms of getting some consistent minutes. And you and I talked about this going back to Summer League, right? It was the thing where last year, when you see him on the floor with all the stars and the spacing, there's this functionality to his game. Then we watch him in Summer League. And I think that's kind of the eye test too, is right. Can you look dominant? It's why we thought, well, DDJ, let's see what he looks like in preseason because he's showing it in Summer League. Same thing with Cam Thomas. Kessler Edwards just looked like a body out there in preseason in the Summer League. And that's a problem. I think that he is as much a victim of getting overexposed in terms of showing the fans that he has a skill set and it can function way sooner than the Brooklyn Nets would have ever anticipated, I think, really going to that well, right? He's a second round pick. A lot of things happened last season that afford the Brooklyn Nets to do this interesting thing where a lot of young guys are playing way sooner than they would like. I like him. I like him to develop, but there's a reason. You used to say this last season. There's a reason why you get picked in the second round. It's usually because everyone in the NBA is athletic, but athleticism at the NBA level is paramount. And he is a little bit stiff. He's not quite fluid. And the next phases of his game are being able to put the ball on the deck and go at the basket a little bit more. And honestly, he has to be able to show that defensive versatility with consistency too, because even though he seems like he can, there are times, and even going back to last year, where he kind of gets caught in the wash a little bit, and guys that can put the ball on the court are going to give him problems. So, in between on him, little disheartening, but I still like him obviously to be sitting on the bench this season and learning from other people.
And just reminder about Kessler too, is that last year it was sort of just they needed him because they had no other guy like him. They had no one else that was 6'6" or above that could shoot threes. Like that wasn't Kevin Durant. Like they just didn't even have a guy. They didn't have a guy who could guard threes or fours from the other team really at all that could space the court. They didn't have a single guy on the court like that. So he was played sort of out of necessity more than anything else. I think he was fine. He did fine in what was asked of him, but it was really more born out of what the Nets didn't have on the rest of the roster, a little more than what he was actually showing he could do at like an NBA level, right? It was like at some point they just needed a warm body who stood above a certain height that could every once in a while shoot a wide open three and make it. Like they have a few more guys that can do that this season. And when that's the case, his services aren't required in the way that they were required last season. Like it was just he was more a byproduct of sort of mismanagement around the rest of the roster than it was about him going and just completely balling out on the time he was there. It was fine. He's better than a second round pick. I think I would still agree on that. It's just that I just that I think he's probably buried here because he's just now at this point with the way the rest of the roster lines up, he just doesn't do enough.
Raquan Gray, obviously, I know fans like talk about. I'm doing this just to round out who was in there. He had the filler minutes at the back end of this thing. Alondes Williams, that's a bit of a head scratcher given his age. He doesn't really see the court here. Be interesting just to see how he develops in the G League. These are guys that are going to the G League this season. But on the whole, man, just in totality, first and second half from this one, when we think about the players we're talking about, Yuta Watanabe, I mean, even Morris with his sample size, Edmond Sumner, we know no Seth Curry, obviously, which is going to push some guys down the pecking order. And then also a guy like TJ Warren, right? Clearly, he's going to be up here in this mix. But that's 4 names that we're bringing up that weren't a part of this roster last season, right? So after you settle things down in the offseason with Kevin Durant, you get everybody back in here, and you know Ben Simmons is going to be healthy. Sean Marks, Steve Nash, Kevin Durant, they looked at this roster and they said, we know that there's things that we need to change here. And what you're now seeing is what? 3 or 4 guys that were getting real minutes last season, getting bumped down this pecking order and having guys that fit the scheme better, have better functionality, and have consistently higher floors, I think, which is what the Brooklyn Nets are trying to accomplish this preseason going into the year when it comes to the rotation players that need to fill out this roster.
And that's a good sign for the team, like as a whole. That's a good thing for the team, right? That some of these players have been bumped down bumps up your projection on the next season. Like that's the other way to look at this. It's not a knock on these guys. It's just that they've done a better job about rounding out the roster around real NBA bodies at this point. And that's just going to push down these guys that played out of necessity a little bit more. So I think in general, it becomes, it's not great for those guys, but it's great. It's better for the team as a whole. Okay. We're going to get out of here. A million comments on YouTube. I tried to get in there and reply to as many as possible. Really good stuff too, like positive thoughts and really appreciate all that stuff. I mean, hundreds of comments in there.
My PSA at the top was directed probably at the minority than the majority. The majority was ecstatic to see basketball out there in the Nets and watching this develop. It was fantastic.
Yeah, so really appreciate that. Just a couple things that are super easy to do that you can do to help the podcast. One is you just follow Adam and I on Twitter at Doug Norrie, at Artem Armbrecht. That's just our names. So you can just give us a follow on Twitter. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have crested over 3,000, pushing toward 4,000 subscribers now. Really appreciate all the love over there. And make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple. All those things are totally free. They're just simple clicks, and that's the best way to help the podcast.
And for any of you folks out there that were complaining or talking negative after the first preseason game, man, I bet you were moping around after that, weren't you? That's Miles Darby from Step Up.
Oh, one of the all-time great American poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.